Hello, and welcome to the Bitcoin Takeover podcast. I am Vlad, and this is the sixth episode of season 3 of this podcast. My guest today is Colin, and I used to joke with him that I should introduce him as Melon Colin and the Infinite Sadness. But no, he is Colin Harper from Bitcoin Magazine, and he is responsible for part of the work which brought me on board on Bitcoin Magazine because it was him during the Bitcoin 2019 conference that messaged me and said, "Hey man, are you around? Because maybe we should talk and you could possibly write for us." And I'm forever grateful for that. I'm happy that I get to talk to Colin. He is one of the nicest people ever, and he has yet to show any signs of having any kind of ego with him. So, hi, Colin.
How you doing, Vlad? Happy to have you on the team, man, and happy to be on the podcast.
Yeah, this is thrilling, really. I used to hate you at some point. I remember
Uh,
when I was working for Crypto Insider and you posted that article about Hodlo not storage being passed by Jack Dorsey. And I guess
oh, yeah.
like 10 minutes or something, and Jack Dorsey retweeted your article, and I was so pissed.
Yeah, man. I mean, I feel it. I've had people beat me to stories in the past, and it always hurts. You know, it's like, shit, they got to it before me. But it's a bummer. I wish you could have gotten a retweet by Jack as well. But like I said, glad you're on Bitcoin Magazine now, even after Crypto Insider folded.
Yeah, I'm happy. There's nothing to complain about this. I got to a point where I don't think I have any higher purpose or goal in this field. Once you get to, Bitcoin Magazine, it's like the ivory tower itself. You find
Hell yeah, man.
articles about 5 times before publishing, and you have about 3 editors who read your stuff before it goes live. And before this, it wasn't quite like this. You had at most one person proofreading, and they usually had no idea whether or not you got your facts right. They wouldn't check. And it was much more important to have it published fast and then correct along the way if somebody tells you that you have made mistakes than to actually get something right the first time. And that's
for sure. I remember that a lot with some of the sites that I used to write for when I was getting into freelancing for like Bitcoin and crypto. Like the Merkle back in the day was like this. CCN was a lot like this. And a handful of other ones that were really just like hobbyist sites during the ICO boom, which is crazy. It's like during 2016 and 17, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and blockchain news sites just started springing up out of nowhere, all over the place. It really accompanied the ICO boom in a strange way. And they kind of fed on each other too, because they were all posting like, scammy promotional things and things like that. And just all of this sponsored and paid content. Like the lines were blurred between whether or not it was sponsored, and it was all of these PR firms and ICOs just throwing around money to get coverage. It was a mess.
Oh, I remember that.
For sure. So
articles about stuff, and they would tell me, "Oh, how about you write about this?" But why should I write about it? Is there anything special? Does it, tell it apart from the competition in any way? This is just some kind of ICO or project which promised to make some kind of payments to the organization for which I was working. And I was being given some kind of assignment from time to time to write about this. I mean, there were people who were shameless in this regard and wouldn't care about it. And they would say, just give me anything. As long as you pay me for it, I don't care. And that was
right.
Focus on stuff in which I could actually believe and that I could relate to and say, this actually has some kind of potential.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really what like our pivot was about too, back in the end of 2018. We were like, we're going back to Bitcoin because it didn't make sense to be spending time covering all of these other projects that fundamentally were associated with really not much progress, just like at all, whether that be technical or whether that be actually like getting users. I'm a little more of a softcore maximalist. Like I wouldn't mind if we started covering some things Ethereum, even if that were to be critical about it. But I mean, I think pivoting back towards strictly Bitcoin has been a very good move. And it's opened up the content and the focus towards this industry in a way that wasn't I don't know, wasn't as available when we were covering a bunch of other things. And it gives us a chance to bring in guys like you who are really, strong Bitcoin maximalists who really get the brand and who really want to, keep on fighting the good fight.
I remember the day when I read about Bitcoin Magazine switching to Bitcoin only. And I read that article, which was basically telling a story about how Bitcoin Magazine has been around since Mastercoin, which was the first ICO, and Ethereum, and then it tried to stay clear along the path of 2017 when it was kind of blurry. You can look at it and say, oh, these were the legit projects, and these are the ones which maybe will be around in the next 5 to 10 years. But around the time, there was so much hype and there was so much promise about certain technologies and certain projects, which right now are dead. And unless you're very technical and were able to know who was behind them and what kind of people they are, and if these partnerships with the organizations with the promises to fund the projects were actually legit, because I know, I don't know, Stellar promised a partnership with Microsoft or something, and IOTA promised lots of partnerships, but where are they now? I guess they'll die out in a couple of years. And it was all about some coins promising to do scalability better, to do privacy better, and improve onto what Bitcoin has. But we have learned it maybe the hard way that it's all about network effects and...
Yes, absolutely. I was just about to say, first mover advantage is real, and no amount of fundraising or hype or media presence will really change that. And because it ultimately also boils down to security in a lot of regards. How secure, how old is the chain? How long have people put their trust in it? And to think in a lot of regards that a lot of this technology that was overhyped to begin with would come to replace Bitcoin because people were marketing it more was always, dubious at best.
I also remember that whole movement of blockchain, not crypto.
Yeah, for sure. In blockchain, not Bitcoin. And now, I think we're starting to see the pivot in the opposite direction. Did you see Hacker Noon's recent blog post, like their announcement? Did you see that?
No.
They basically said they're going to stop letting certain coins be advertised, and they're going to pivot a lot more back towards Bitcoin and like Ethereum and Litecoin and XRP. But their kind of point was, obviously a lot of cryptocurrencies have proven to be fraudulent and scammy. A lot of ICOs, obviously. So, and to deter that kind of like false marketing, they're just not letting people post about that kind of stuff anymore. Which I thought was pretty interesting. Someone in our company Slack was like, in a year or two, everyone's going to be pivoting back towards Bitcoin, which, I don't think solely on Bitcoin. I think you're still going to have blockchain as a narrative in some places, and you're still going to have people talking about Ethereum unless it just completely dies out in some other altcoins. But the narrative, I think, is going to be obviously majority Bitcoin in a lot of regards.
I guess you can also see right now, as we expect for a new bull market to emerge, that the pattern does not repeat. It's not like 2017 where people invest in whatever seems cheap and they regard as the next Bitcoin. And you look at the Bitcoin dominance right now and you see that it's maybe around 70%, which is a lot more than it used to be 2 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. We saw it go from like 80 down to I think its low point was something crazy, like below 40. I'm not totally certain. Actually Google that really quickly. But it got into maybe the high 30s even at one point. And now it's climbing back up. And I think that's one of the things that's going to be an interesting narrative in this next bull market is alts being just juiced and people just going into Bitcoin. Because there's a very strong possibility where when alts start capitulating, and certain whales just give up trying to keep a certain altcoin afloat in the market. What are they going to sell to? There's probably not going to be enough dollar liquidity on those alts, so they're going to have to go to another coin like Bitcoin. And it's probably going to be Bitcoin. Maybe they'll do Ethereum or XRP if they're dumb, but
I like to think that whales are not really dumb. They may take risks, expecting that people follow them. And
right.
I don't think that they will capitulate so easily.
You don't think so?
No. I think that at some point there will be that media hype and it's going to be all over the news once again. And the narrative that you're going to find a project which is the next Bitcoin, it will always be around.
Right. Sorry, I'm looking up the dominance. Yeah, so on February 20th, 2017, Bitcoin was at 86% dominance. And from February all the way down to June. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so it was all the way down to January 8th, 2018, which is at the top of the bubble. Bitcoin's dominance was at 33%. And ever since the bubble burst, it's only been climbing.
I guess that was the climax of the ICO bubble.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that Ethereum was about $1,500 or something.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, dude, it was. And I remember I was at my first or second ever. No, I was at my second ever conference. At that point, I had only been writing. You want to know my dirty little secret, Vlad?
Sure.
I was a shit coiner before I joined Bitcoin Magazine. So I was writing for this one site called Coin Central. We used to write guides and stuff for it was my first gig, and we used to write guides for all like the shit coins and altcoins that came out, just like what their white papers were saying and stuff like that. And I went to a conference in January. So it started in 2017. I went to a conference in January, and the first one was a Blockchain Connect, which is run by this Chinese media company called SV Insight. And the other one was Neo's DevCon. And I remember talking to one of Neo's, one of their core, executives. And I remember asking him, what would you say to someone getting in the cryptocurrency market right now? And this was in January when the market was shitting its bed or about to shit the bed. And he said, don't get in. It's too hot right now. And little did he know that altcoins would begin to bleed in the bear market and in the reaccumulation in the bull. But anyway, just dropped a lot there. But I used to go to like blockchain, cryptocurrency conferences and things like that when I was basically just writing about those. And then when I joined Bitcoin Magazine, I pivoted and was shown the light by the likes of Aaron and my editor, Christy.
Yeah, I guess you have the studies. You finished the university with a focus on letters or English?
Yeah, I graduated from a liberal arts college in 2017, and had a rough summer after graduating and didn't know what I wanted to do come fall. And then I knew I wanted to write, but I couldn't find any way to really write about anything. I couldn't get my foot in the door anywhere. And then I found Bitcoin, and I'd always known about Bitcoin. Like, I remember my friend describing mining in 2009. He didn't know what he was talking about. We were like freshmen in high school. And some of my buddies bought drugs off of the Silk Road in college and stuff like that. So I'd always known about it. And I had noticed that like the market, I was just looking at how much it was back in, this was August of 2017. And it was going for $5,000. And I remember in college when my buddies were buying drugs with it, it was like at 300. And that just blew me away. I was like, holy shit, this thing is. And then I looked at the altcoin market and thought, whoa, it's not just Bitcoin anymore. It's all of this other shit. And the altcoins were really what drew me in at first, the whole get rich quick thing. And I invested a little bit in Bitcoin and some alts, saw fantastic gains, obviously, in the bull market, and ended up obviously losing through holding through some of the bull market, and just reaccumulated all into Bitcoin during the bear. So I ended up graduating with an English degree and writing about cryptographic currencies, which my professors back at my university get a kick out of.
Really?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they just never expected it because they don't know what Bitcoin is. Like, no one in Tennessee, I mean, people in Tennessee know what Bitcoin is. People in like the city and like more, I think the wealthier you are, the more likely you're going to know about Bitcoin. I think that's in the States in general, but especially in Tennessee. But in a lot of regards, Bitcoin is still very much like it's a household name in terms of hype and people talking about the price increases, but actually knowing what it is, not very many people know. People are talking about it who know about it to their families and stuff, so there are those network effects, but it's not like New York or California or a lot of places in Europe.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
Yeah, what's it like in Croatia? Or Romania, excuse me.
Well, you'd be surprised because in day-to-day life, I don't know anybody whom I can talk about it. But you find all these strange places and you discover that there used to be a Romanian who was one of the biggest names in Bitcoin around 2010. He's believed to own about 600,000 Bitcoins, which is insane. He mined like heavily in the early days and was kind of the Roger Ver of those times. And
yes,
where he lives anymore and stuff like that. So when you find out and you're like, oh, a country which has 19 million people, and what are the odds for this place to actually be, the origins of one of the biggest Bitcoin whales? And we have lots of good software engineers. I guess that's why they got interested in Bitcoin at that early point, because we have lots of geeks.
Right on, man.
But if regular people, they have no idea what it's like, and it's often easy to compare to Ponzi schemes. I've had some experiences in
right.
I'm not sure
and
how
I think
communist history or
I've got a fair amount. So you cut out a little bit there. How were you relating it back to communism, or what were people saying?
Well, we have been a democracy for only almost 30 years.
Right.
In December, it's going to be 30 years because we had the revolution in 1989. And in the early 90s, when it was still chaotic, you didn't have any kind of measure to what the society should be, and people were still experimenting. You'd have all these Ponzi schemes, and nobody knew about them. Got smart.
Okay.
Let's exploit.
Oh, that's really interesting. So because of Romania's history after the dissolution of the Soviet Union.
Colin?
Yeah, sorry, did I cut out there?
Yeah.
So because of the Soviet Union's, because of Romania's history with Ponzi schemes following the dissolution of the Soviet Union, people were very skeptical of cryptocurrencies and all that stuff during the bubble, I imagine.
When it was at its peak, the bull market in 2017, and everybody was talking about it, I went to the kitchen and I heard mom listening to the radio, and the show host was saying, oh, we don't need any kind of Bitcoin stuff because we have already learned in the 90s how the Ponzi's and pyramid schemes work.
Wow, that's incredible. And that's the kind of language that just automatically obviously turns people off, and they just think, they look at cryptocurrencies and all of these different coins and they say, look at this bubble, look at all this excess wealth that's being printed. And it's a shame because it's an easy argument to make, and it's one Bitcoiners actually agree with. Is the funny thing. It's yes, we don't like that either. And it's hard to distinguish for people. It's Bitcoin is not like that. Let me teach you what Bitcoin is and why it was created and how it is fundamentally different from things that came after it. And that's what people always say. They say, well, you can just print more cryptocurrencies. It's sure, you can print more fiat currencies too, but we don't believe in, people in the U.S. use the U.S. dollar, not a foreign currency. With Bitcoin, try sending Bitcoin Cash or try sending anything else to someone with a Bitcoin address,
Sometimes I try to talk with my father about all this stuff, and it all comes down to who controls it. And he has this idea that it's some kind of conspiracy to fool us millennials who have no understanding of money. and
Yeah.
new generation Ponzi to him, and he says, I think it's some kind of governmental organization because otherwise it would not survive for such a long time and they would go down.
Does he believe the NSA launched Bitcoin?
I guess, or the CIA or the Chinese or the Russians.
Yeah.
Not very clear, but in his mind, the fact that there's a Satoshi who owns 1 million Bitcoins and he can crash the market at any point, to him, that's the Ponzi element.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like if a lot of people, that's such a complicated situation because it's like for people, that's either a feature or a bug, right? Like some people think that that's a good thing because there's the game theory argument that he'd never do that because it would destroy what he created, or if not destroy, then debilitate it. And there are other people obviously say that's an attack vector, that's a weakness. But there's also like the nuance that we do sort of know, but we don't know if those are just Satoshis, which I guess opens up another kind of angle of worry depending on how you view Bitcoin's creation and founding.
Yeah, we like to agree that its conception was immaculate, and the people who got in early on had no sense of greed. It was just pure curiosity and geekiness.
Yeah.
People like Laszlo guy who ordered pizzas.
Yeah, for sure.
Had no idea how big this could get. Or maybe he had, but he didn't.
Yeah.
It was so easy to acquire so many Bitcoins that why would he bother?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I interviewed him for the Bitcoin Pizza Day this past year, and he said exactly that. He's like, he was like, it was a hobbyist thing. I didn't think it was going to necessarily go anywhere. And for him, I thought his perspective was pretty cute and refreshing. He was like, when I was buying them, I felt like I got free pizza because, he would just mine all those Bitcoin and he didn't really do anything other than boot up his computer. And back then it didn't cost anything. So it was funny. He was like, I felt like I was winning the internet that day. Which I think is true of a lot of like early adopters. Like people always assume that they're rich, and that's assuming that they held on to it. You ride out a few bubbles. Some people obviously have gained enormous wealth from it, like the Winklevosses, but not everyone, didn't just sell during certain price increases.
Yeah, that's right. Because usually regular people who mine some Bitcoins will just look at the price and say, okay, this is like 10x or 15x or 20x of what they were worth at the time. Why would I not buy myself, a new car or pay some kind of rent with the money or do something useful? And
yeah, seriously.
It increased, and there was that first bubble, which led up to what was the price? Just above 20 or something?
It was like 32, I think. You're talking about like the 2010, 2011 bubble, right?
That one.
Yeah, for sure. I think it was like 32, and then it crashed down to like 2, I think.
And it's not like today when you see, I guess in December 2018, you were watching at the price and seeing it's 3,000 something. And you were saying it's coming back because look at all the good news, all the adoption happening among the institutions. And then you have the ETF discussed, and you have all of these people gaining interest in investing in this thing. So there is no way it's going to stay this low for a long time. But when it went to $32 and then went back to $2, you had no idea that there was any future.
Yeah. I mean, right. Like, why would you think that it would? It's like it just went to 32 and then dropped, $30. And it's like, oh, shit. What am I going to do with this now? And I think that's one of the more incredible things about like Bitcoin's market cycles is like just keeps doing that. And the whole what Dan Held's concept, and really he says Satoshi talks about this too, concept of like the negative or the positive feedback loop. Going back to what you're talking to your dad about it. My old man's a gold bug, and he's pretty interested in Bitcoin. He doesn't think it's a scam, which is a plus, but he's still kind of a skeptical boomer, and he hasn't put any money in it yet. I told him back when it was at 3K, I was like, hey man, Bitcoin's dirt cheap. You should get some. And unfortunately, he did not listen. And then it went up, and he was like, "Oh, it's too expensive now." It's like, well, yeah, that's why I told you should have gotten it when it was dirt cheap.
My father is actually Gen X.
Oh, he is? Yeah, that would make sense. My dad's almost Gen X, but he's just on the cutoff. Because how old are you?
I'm 27 right now.
Okay, word.
Well, what was that?
Oh, I said word.
Word.
Yeah, word.
I guess you're young.
Yeah, I'm 24.
I wish I was 24.
Hey, 27's a good age, man.
There's a club 27.
Oh yeah, there is. Yeah, so you're going to some pretty cool conferences pretty soon, right?
Oh yeah, there's that one in Cluj in Romania, which is about 10 hours of driving from where I live. But I will go all the way, and I can't wait to make a presentation there. It's going to be about confiscation, and I guess it's part of all these discussions which start from the question of why Bitcoin? Why does it make any sense? Why does it have any value? And
oh, cool.
If you look at Saifedean nowadays, he's talking about the destruction of Bitcoin and how it can actually happen if governments reverted and went back to the gold standard. Because he believes that there is no value in this kind of asset if your money is backed by real gold and you can actually use cash, which is the most private form of making payments, as it can only show your face to the person who receives the money, and it's very confidential as opposed to having a credit card. But there's also the part about confiscation, and that's very, I don't know how I should call it, but when you come from a family like mine, which had all the wealth confiscated when the communists came, and then they had their wealth inflated when the regime fell after 1989, you realize...
Yeah, it has a different significance, especially to those of us in America and some places where we haven't had those kind of economic turmoils and really political and social turmoils and control. I think it definitely has a deeper significance for y'all, and for just like, I think that's why like places like Prague is like apparently a pretty big cypherpunk and Bitcoin city, and a lot of Eastern European countries have a pretty big Bitcoin followings, and like very fervent supporters in ways that I don't think you see in the States as much.
You have no reason, really.
Yeah, no, we don't. Right. It's a money-making game for people in the States, right? And that's how it gets portrayed, and that's the draw for a lot of people. But that's one thing that I like to encourage people, and when you talk about stuff like this in the States, people assume you're paranoid when you talk about like, and this goes back to a lot of things like guns rights, and not even just traditional conservative rights, but just paranoia about the state, like libertarian sentiments. It's like, that's one of the things that I like to stress to people. It's like, yo, guys, we have a pretty sound dollar, but our banking system is still involved in a feedback loop of what is going to eventually just be terrible debt bubbles. And eventually, if our currency is not worth anything, then you're going to wish that you had something hard like Bitcoin or precious metals to hedge with. And they assume that it can never happen back home, but if it happens elsewhere, it can happen here too.
Let me tell you something about the American stock market. It used to
tell me about it, Vlad.
Own only about 30-40% of the world's assets. And the world was kind of distributed in this regard. You had the German stock market, which was also worth 20-something%, and you had the Chinese one. But now you have the American stock market, which owns about 60% of the world's wealth.
Jesus Christ.
So in case Wall Street does something very dumb, just like they did in 2008, 2009, then the whole world is fucked. And it's not going to be as easy for the rest of the world to adapt, because you have the government just, a few hundred miles away from New York, or maybe 2,000. I didn't count. I'm not...
Yeah, no, but I see what you're saying.
Is going to have so much more trouble trying to adjust to problems which are not theirs.
Right.
They're
And
only
that's another.
they rely on a system which is not as stable as they believe.
Yeah, I mean they do, and that's another thing for putting Bitcoin into perspective. I think for some people is they look at, wow, Bitcoin's got the peak of the market, the entire cryptocurrency at the peak of the last bull, the entire cryptocurrency market was worth something like $800 million or $800 billion, excuse me. And right now, Bitcoin's market cap is projected at 200 billion. But people say, well, that's so much. And when you really think about how much of the wealth that Wall Street and derivatives, if you look at the derivatives market is enough to make someone insane. I mean, you want to talk about printing money, you're creating value out of, like, you're basically creating a contract to trade something and saying that has value. Like, are you kidding me? And people want to talk about how Bitcoin is an inflated and a market in a bubble. When you really start looking at legacy finance and legacy markets, the products that Wall Street has created to basically create more credit and value and wealth out of nowhere is insane. And I didn't even know that Wall Street accounts for like 60% of the world's wealth. If that's true, that's fucking insane.
I mean, it doesn't account for it, but it trades it because you have all these tech
Oh, okay.
American.
Right.
They basically control world finance. You have companies like Microsoft and Facebook and maybe Twitter, but I guess it's smaller, and Google, which is huge. It's hard to think of any kind of real competition for these companies. And even if they have any kind of competition, it's usually also American.
Yeah, right.
You own the software, you own the patents for technology, even though it gets produced in China or Taiwan or India or some other lesser developed country. It's American companies that hold the patents for this kind of technology that the rest of the world uses. And then you also have licenses, and the TV shows that we watch on a regular basis are pretty much what you used to have about 20 years ago. You have everything from The Price is Right to Jeopardy to Family Feud and everything else. Because our television channels are unable to produce anything original, so they buy licenses,
Right.
shows, and
Yeah.
the
And I
voice
think
factor and all that shit. And
I think that's why you've seen things like Netflix and Hulu and Amazon come in with their own original series and really knock it out of the park with people. Because no one, I mean, I don't pay for cable. Do you pay? Like, I don't know anyone in my generation that pays for cable.
I don't have cable in my house.
Yeah. It's like, why would you? Because at this point with the internet, we've democratized so many forms of media. I shouldn't say fully democratized, because that's not true, but it's opening up avenues for media to be freed up to different content creators who aren't just these companies who have been monopolizing content for since you name it, back when telecom became a thing. And Bitcoin's part of this narrative is what I love. I love Andreas Antonopoulos, the internet of money. It's like, that's what this is. That's what Bitcoin is. And I think once you really, whenever I talk to my family or people who don't really know much about it, I think once we really try to explain it to them cogently and they actually get it and it clicks with them, they start to think, wow, that's actually really cool. Doesn't mean they're not still skeptical, but I think if you can really explain the value of Bitcoin and how it works and what it means in relation to the evolution of the internet and the way information and privacy is flowing within the internet, it starts to make sense to them. And those libertarian ideas stop being so crazy.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, you don't have to convince Bitcoiners of that.
Yeah, exactly. I was just thinking that I had this argument with my father at one point about Uber and regular taxis. And he was like, you can't just allow any passenger to go into a car which has no license and pays no taxes and is not properly prepared for, transporting people. And I told him, how can you actually control people who want to share their cars with somebody else? He's like, yeah, but that's doing taxi. And I said, no, taxi being part of a taxi company implies being part of that kind of framework, but Uber is outside it.
Yeah.
In terms of how can I, as a person who drives from point A to point B, actually save some costs and take a couple of passengers along the way. And I also told him that reputation and that whole system of rating drivers works a lot better and gives maybe people more trust into the system, as opposed to just walking in any taxi knowing that they are regulated and the drivers should be checked in theory, but sometimes they rip you off, or they are rude and they make the whole ride feel uncomfortable. And I have lady friends who never walk into a taxi because they are afraid of being harassed. And
Yeah, absolutely. And I never even really thought about the reputation system, but yeah, I mean, that's brilliant. It keeps drivers accountable. And I've had female friends too who just like won't get into a taxi either, or have had bad experiences like that. One of the sorry, what did you say?
Yeah, I had a sip of water. That's why I didn't reply immediately. But
oh, you're good.
It's the same with Bitcoin. It relies on a reputation system. The whole space is all about building trust and delivering. And there isn't much regulation yet. There aren't many governmental authorities that mining, for example. The system is in a way to encourage greed, in the sense that if they act in their best financial interest, they're still going to be rewarded, and it's good for the network. But at the same time, you had bad actors like Bitmain around 2017, 2018, when they were mining empty blocks as a way of getting rewards. And you can have miners who censor certain transactions. But the beauty of an open market is that you're going to have another type of competition, or a competitor who's going to just accept everything and make the money out of it.
Yeah, for sure. You made a point. You made a point earlier that I wanted to respond on. Sorry, I got distracted petting my cats. Oh yeah, digital IDs on Bitcoin and like reputation systems. One of the things that I'm really excited about with something like Bitcoin, and especially the Lightning Network, is creating direct monetization for content for creators. And we've seen, there's like y'alls and some like projects that are trying to do stuff like this. Satoshi's Games is kind of a good example too, which I know we're both a fan of. We're gonna have to play Lightning Agar here pretty soon, because I've gotten in there when there's been no one else except maybe one other player, but I don't know if it was a bot or not. I'm really passionate about seeing what cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, the concept of cryptocurrency, and with Bitcoin as a way for users to monetize their own content, what that's going to mean for the evolution of streaming for media, whether that be music, film, video games, independent gaming, or journalism and monetizing content on the web. I think there are lots of potential for things there, and there are a lot of tokens in the ICO boom that had models around this, but you don't really need a token for this. Obviously, you can just use Bitcoin.
Yeah, I guess Microsoft is the company behind the ID system on.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that will be, depending on how it works, it's another layer that I'm not quite sure how it'll be monetized yet. I talked to Daniel, I can't remember his last name, about it for a story a while back. And it seems like they've got a pretty complicated like structure for how they're going to provide it. But something like that would be huge, and you could have reputation systems built on social media networks and all of this thing, all of that. Twitter could integrate with it, which would be fucking awesome.
So in the end, Bitcoin is going to support a world computer.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, at least that's what Ethereum or ETH heads would have with Ethereum. A little bit different than that. I don't know. I find Ethereum maximalists interesting in a way that I don't find Bitcoin maximalists totally absurd on Twitter. But obviously, I'm biased.
Actually, I read a post on Twitter today, or maybe yesterday. I'm a bit blurry right now, but it basically said, what do you call people who steal ideas from Ethereum and put them on Bitcoin and claim that they are great?
What?
No, it was an open question, and people were coming up with names like Ethereum maximalists. But
oh my God.
That exist for Ethereum have been around for a longer time in the case of Bitcoin, but they just realized that the base layer, the main blockchain, is just not scalable. There's no way for it to support all that kind of data and activity. And it took a long time to figure out how they can build a second layer, which only sends validations on the main chain. And it's from this point onwards that they figure out how all these old ideas, which they thought that were only possible on altcoins, can be implemented into Bitcoin. And I guess that's part of the reason why we see the dominance going up once again.
Yeah, I think that's true.
And everything is becoming much more Bitcoin centric, even the conferences.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the thing about the conferences too. Like, I mean, Bitcoin conferences are already a cash grab, but shitcoin conferences, Jesus Christ, you know, the ICO boom fueled some crazy stuff. I mean, I remember Consensus. So, fun fact: Christie's brother is Anthony Diorio, who's one of the co-founders of Ethereum, and she was telling me how in Consensus 2018 there were like yacht parties and stuff. It was just absolutely absurd, and all that obviously was just money from the ICO boom.
Oh yeah, and they had Snoop Dogg at the XRP party.
Oh yeah, seriously? Oh my God.
There was a lot of stuff going on. They had Lambos parked in front of the place, like the venue.
It's so cringy. It's just so excessive. And it paints a really bad look for the industry too, is what I hate.
It does, but don't you remember all the TV documentaries about Bitcoin that were airing around the time? And they were.
That's true. I guess any press is good press. It's still awareness, you know?
Yeah, but they painted this idea that you have wacky people who wanted to buy drugs and forgot that they wanted to buy drugs, and then they found out that they are millionaires.
Yeah. Oh my God. It's like, yeah, I mean, obviously, like, that's the thing is like media loves that story because, you know, it's big and outlandish and it's attention grabbing. But there are so many more stories, like, you know, that the mainstream media could be telling, and they've started telling, some of them have. But, you know, it's always gets cited and it's kind of tired at this point. But places like Venezuela and Iran, where it actually is providing a lifeline to people, I mean, that's what it's all about. And I think that's why I love writing stories about that and getting the truth out there with things like that. Because, I mean, that's why this technology was created. It disempowers the state. And that makes some people uncomfortable. That's why they just paint us all as anarchists. Which, I mean, a lot of us are. But
I'm not going to complain about labels. That's kind of a leftist activity.
Yeah, for sure. That really is.
Like, what do you identify yourself as?
Yeah, that's really hard. I've like, when I was in high school, I identified myself as a libertarian. I don't think that necessarily holds totally true anymore, because there are some things with like free market economics that I don't really agree with totally. In terms of like the way capitalism functions in America as a like, well, so let me back up. If I had to identify myself as anything, it would probably be, if I were to identify myself as anything in an unself-aware way or in a self-aware way, it'd be a radical centrist. And like people meme on that, and it's, you know, it's a ridiculous term. But
the same at your age.
Yeah, for sure. So I don't know where I'll be in a few years. I'm actually kind of an outlier in terms of some of the Bitcoin community. I feel like a lot of people are like extremely like right libertarian. I'd probably define myself as like left libertarian, and some people think that that's kind of an oxymoron, but it's really not. If you look back to the foundation of libertarianism, it was originally an off-brand, like an offshoot of socialism. And I wouldn't call myself a socialist in, any sense necessarily. Maybe democratic socialism. People always link it to the state though, and say socialism is all about subsuming services under the state. And like traditionally that's not true, but that's all how it always turns out in practice. And I don't want to be one of those people who's like, oh, well, true socialism or communism has never been truly practiced. So to answer your question, I don't really know, but I would say left libertarian or like radical centrist, and to kind of default the two kind of watery, vague answers.
It's hard for me to identify with anything leftist when I know that my grandparents were, actually my grandparents were small business owners, and they lost everything when
Right.
communists came, and they were big fans of confiscation and redistribution. And it's not like it was their utopian society that was being built, even though some people who otherwise would have been mere peasants for generations ended up getting education, which is great. But they created their own system of elites. And
yeah, absolutely. And that's why, I think a lot of people, I went to school, and a lot of the people I hung out with were, some of them were like your run-of-the-mill liberals. Some of them were straight out leftists though, and would be self-avowed communist or socialist, all that kind of stuff. And I think that there's a lot of stuff that just like not living in Eastern Europe or Europe in general, they just like fundamentally don't understand about the history of that political doctrine. And that's why I don't really say the things like, true communism has never been tested, because like, in Russia it was tested, and whether or not you think that's true communism, because that would be their response to what you just said. It's like at the end of the day, it still happened. And Lenin and Trotsky and all of them who founded what the Soviet Union eventually became were leftists. And it ultimately just became a power grab. It was just a transference of power. And that's part of the reason why I'm kind of hesitant to like really align myself with anything, is because it's all bullshit and it's all about power. Like if maybe, if I were, I'm trying to think of a way to phrase this. This doesn't mean completely honest with myself, but if I were more convicted and had more kind of conviction behind my beliefs with these political ideologies, I'd say maybe I'd be an anarchist, or not really an ANCAP, but just an anarchist in general. But I don't know. All I know is that the state as it works right now propagates death and suffering. So whatever is an alternative to that, I don't know what it is, but I don't think I have the answers. Sorry, that was a really rambly answer.
No, it's actually fine. Usually it's very difficult for you Americans to actually acknowledge that your constitution is brilliant and is the most stable. Actually, after Magna Carta from Great Britain, but they did not follow up with the royalty after World War II.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
A symbolic kind of political representation. It's all about the parliament and their elections for the prime minister right now. But the American Republic is actually the best example of a functional political system. And even in times of crisis and turmoil, you still have the kind of leverage to function. The system being federal is not entirely centralized. So you can have all sorts of situations in different states, and you'll still have prosperity, and you grant the greatest amount of liberties to a large number of people, which has to be productive.
So that is one thing that I am a big proponent of in terms of America's governance system, is states' rights. And that always gets played as a really conservative thing. The Democrats in the United States have, traditionally been more comfortable with centralizing certain services with the government. but I am a big believer in decentralizing those, like letting the states make decisions. Certain decisions I don't think should be left up to the states alone. I mean, just quite to put it bluntly, if the Civil War hadn't happened and we hadn't had amendments to our Constitution, slavery never would have been abolished, at least not for some time. And some Southerners are not so comfortable with making those admissions, but we need to know where we've come from and the abuses and the sins that we have, caused in the past. And so, there's certain things I think states shouldn't be allowed to decide on just unilaterally for their populace if certain human rights are being abused. In some ways, I think you can make an argument for the federal minimum wage here, but I'm big about decentralizing that power. And unfortunately, I do agree with you. The United States' democracy functions very well, but it's not really truly a democracy. It's more of a republic, and there are plenty of abuses and a lot of centralization of the power at the top and the most wealthy, and it's only gotten worse. And I don't know how we can fix this. I don't know what would be the best way to do it. But relatively, it's hard to complain sometimes because compared to the rest of the world, the United States is a fabulous place to live. And I don't mean that in the rest of the world, like that sounds a little arrogant, but I mean compared to a lot of places, particularly in the third world. I mean, there's a reason that we have an immigration crisis right now. And my heart goes out to those people being detained. What's up?
No idea what it's like to live in peace for such a long time. I mean,
yeah,
I have no idea.
Right.
My nation has been invaded plenty of times, and we have a long history of turmoil, and we haven't obtained our independence until 1787. No, 1878. Sorry, that's the American Revolution, which I mentioned, and I had it in my mind. So 1878, it was when we gained our independence from, at the time, it was the Ottoman Empire, the Turks.
Oh, right, yeah, for sure. Now Turkey.
Yeah, and they were a big deal in Europe around the time.
Yeah, they were, man. I mean, people don't think about the Ottoman Empire, but they fought in World War I. I mean, they were a big player in European politics up until that massive paradigm shift that happened after World War I and into World War II with Germany's dominance. And yeah, I mean, that's something that people in the United States sometimes take for granted. It's like we've had, even during the world wars, I mean, we lost people, right? Like we lost, I think something like hundreds of thousands, but we didn't see near the carnage that Europe saw. And we've always, because we've been so removed from Europe and from Asia, and we have that buffer, we have the oceans. We've been able to exist without threat of invasion really since the War of 1812. That was the last time that we actually had threat from an outside invader.
Yeah. So the United States is not that bad of a place, trust me.
No, it's not. Yeah, it must be frustrating for people, some people living like yourself in Eastern Europe and seeing a bunch of privileged white kids scream about how things are unfair. But there are inequalities for Americans that need to be addressed. Like our racial tensions, it's very real. And it's something that I think other countries can't really, I'm not going to say they can't appreciate as much, but it's just so much different. Like I've been to, I studied abroad in England, and I've traveled in France a few times, and the race relations are a lot different because a lot of slavery for them was always an exported thing. It happened in the colonies. So they didn't really have to confront it the same way that Americans did. And they also didn't fight a war over it. I think those things are very real. And I think those problems and complaints are real. There are a lot of other things that I do agree with a lot of, I think, Bitcoiners who tend to be more on the libertarian right-leaning side of the spectrum. There are things that I think the left camp does that I don't totally abide with. Some identity politics, some in its extremes, gets on my nerves.
It's actually fun to see the difference between what goes on Twitter, and it's usually people being libertarians and bragging sometimes about their guns or about their sovereignty and trying to protect themselves, and you see people like Jameson Lopp trying to look all manly and tough. And then I guess you switch to something like Facebook, where you see family and friends and university colleagues, and they are so soft and concerned about the problems in the world, and they try to be, sensitive in relation.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, there's a huge dichotomy, and I mean, you can see it. Like, I've always just like get a kick out of like carnivorism in the Bitcoin space. Like that's an incredible phenomenon to me. Like these dudes, these like libertarians who are all into sound money and Bitcoin, and like they're just bragging about eating these fat steaks. I think it's hilarious. Don't get me wrong, love me a good steak. I also love my vegetables. But it really is, and I think it's unfortunate because a lot of, from what I've found, more liberal or left-leaning people are more skeptical of Bitcoin and don't really see the value in it as much, or aren't always inclined to be as interested. And I don't know. It's the same reason why they're not gold bugs, or some of them aren't. But it's upsetting for me because I don't think that sound money or something like Bitcoin should be a political thing. You know what I mean? It should be apolitical. Everyone should agree that a currency or a monetary system divorced from state interest can be a good thing. Is a good thing.
I agree, and I even wrote an article when I was at Crypto Insider, and I made the point that Marxists should definitely get into Bitcoin for value.
Dude, I'm so happy you said that. I'm getting jazzed here, but for the longest time, I have had like in my mind a good essay would be Marx would have loved Bitcoin, because he would have. Like, proof of work is so Marxist, and you can't say that because people think, they get like, they shudder at the thought of like communism. Right? And I'm not saying it's communist, but I'm saying Marx would have liked it. You know what I mean? And like by that like logic, leftists should like it too. Sorry, I just got really excited, but I'm really vibe with that point that you made.
Yeah, have you seen what Saifedean posted today about Marx?
That
there are two types of people. No, there are two ways of approaching Marx: ignoring people who read it and not touching any book by him, or something like that.
But that's the thing, though. It's like you got to engage with those concepts, I think, to really be able to talk to these people. I think here's the thing about Marx for me. I think the way Marx understands how capitalism works and how superstructures, in terms of how the state interacts with monopolies and oligarchies and oligopolies and all of that good stuff. His analysis of the way superstructures in society like that, those interact, is spot on. He got his prognostic is correct. His diagnosis is correct, but his prescription is, I think, where it falls apart, for me at least.
No, I agree, because I read some of his works and he's not as bad as people paint him to be, just because of his predictions of how capitalism would collapse. But he had some fair points about stuff like commodity fetishism.
Yes.
Other phenomena which he observed during his time, because let's not forget that he wrote all this stuff around the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, for sure. He was publishing the bulk of his works in the late 1840s, early 50s. And that's the thing, is like he was writing all of this in 1840. Like one of his some of his more famous essays come in 1848, and this is when there were loads of basically union revolutions all across Europe. And these things were good things because they guaranteed workers' rights. And that's the thing about communism, is like it's trying to get everyone a fair slice. The thing is, where it becomes problematic is when we're talking about redistributing wealth and redistributing the means of production. What Marx meant by that is the workers take it, which is really a great sentiment. But how it always ends up being, like, how do you do that? How do you redistribute wealth across those lines? How do you make it a workers' revolution? Power always has to have an intermediary to redistribute it. And I think what we found with Russia is that once that intermediary or that arbiter for the revolution gets into power, like with Lenin, then, the mantle just gets passed down, and you end up with Stalin. And then you end up with the Soviet Union.
Yeah. I guess what Marx didn't understand and Satoshi did was human nature and game theory. Marx like this teenager who had dreams of romantic situations where reality doesn't really count and you can just dream about this utopian world where workers just say we're not going to put hard labor into your projects anymore and we're going to overtake it. But he didn't think much of what happens after. He just said, oh, they're going to share it according to their needs. But
Right.
he didn't predict that people get lazy. And he was lazy himself. He was a drunkard and had pretty bad relations with his finances. And Friedrich Engels would usually pick him up from bars. So personally, he was kind of, low life.
Yeah. Yeah, not really contributing too much except in theory, which again, I think everyone should read a little bit of Marx just to understand where he was coming from. You don't have to agree with it. And plus, to know what you need to argue against. You should always brush up on the arguments of your opponents, even if you think they're not worth, I don't know, even if you don't think they're worth much, especially if you don't think they're worth much.
I think the best contribution of Marx to society at large is that governments and business owners were actually scared of the ideas spreading, and they started to be more indulgent and accept that workers are okay to just work for 8 hours a day and that they should have vacations, and when they should have some kind of compensation to make up for the fact that they no longer make any money and it's unlikely that family members will take care of them like it was in the traditional families.
Absolutely. And workers need to have protections. I mean, that's the one thing that I think is kind of insidious about I don't know, the idea that our worth is not just caught up in what we work, or what we're doing is work. For at least not for all of us. I think you and I are very blessed to be able to love what we do, right? Like we're talking about technology we love and getting to be paid to write and do something that we enjoy to do, to think, to translate information, to think. Not everyone is so lucky, and that's why I think it is to remember that we're all humans. And this is another thing that I think is beautiful about the internet, the way that people are going to be able to start working for themselves if they know how and they have the right education and they have the right access to technology. But Naval, I can't pronounce his last name, but I think you know who I'm talking about, right? He's got yeah, for sure. He thinks in 20 years, something ridiculous, like the super majority of people in the world are just going to be working through the internet, working for themselves, which might be a little utopian, but I think it's very possible. I mean, decentralized tools. I mean, think about the way our company works. A company like this would have been unheard of, 20 years ago.
Oh yeah, and even to my father, it's strange that I work from home and I don't go to work every morning, and I don't have any kind of office. It's just my desk in my bedroom.
Yeah, right. It's like, oh, so you're writing for a magazine that's based where? In Nashville, Tennessee,
Exactly. But
that's one of
their fault as a generation because it's harder for us to afford real estate.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, man, it's harder for us to afford fucking everything with wage stagnation, with the housing bubble, education bubble, all that stuff. I mean, I know you were or are pursuing your PhD in philosophy, right?
Yeah. Sometimes I started working more seriously in the Bitcoin space, and I don't have as much time to focus on my PhD.
Yeah, I mean, do what you can, right? You're making money right now and getting to write, so that's pretty cool. I thought it was really interesting seeing that you were PhD in philosophy, though, because I feel like in our industry, I was a man of letters in university, so I did a lot of, obviously English classes and did political science and a bunch of humanities. But I liked seeing that you were, a humanities man yourself, because I feel like our industry, it's a lot of either econ people, business people, or, computer scientists or coders, cryptographers, all that.
According to my training, I would actually fit in a government position.
Oh, yeah?
Kind of governmental advisor or work for a member of parliament, stuff like that.
What did you do in undergrad?
Political science, and I did a master in comparative politics, and now
Oh,
I'm
that's cool.
in political philosophy. And I actually write my thesis about internet governance.
Oh, that's really cool.
It is, but I don't have much time to write. And if I have to choose about something which pays for my work and something which doesn't, you know,
Yeah, you're gonna do. Yeah, exactly. Monetize yourself. You don't have to go through the legacy university system. I think, or just like the educational system, to be able to make a difference like that.
there's also the issue of scarcity. You have to think how many graduates in political philosophy there are with PhD degrees, and they are unemployed. And then
Yeah.
I basically work for the greatest media organization in an emerging technological branch. And there are not, maybe that we are in a bubble right now, but there are not many people who actually know about this stuff. And as
Yeah.
it becomes much more mainstream, there's going to be more demand for the kind of work that we do. And maybe
Yeah.
we're going to be like, you know, I'm trying to think of famous journalists,
Yeah. No, I see what you're saying.
but we're going to be just like them, but for
Yeah.
which becomes part of the norm in 10, 20 years.
Yeah, man. This was something that I thought about getting my PhD in English. When I was in school, that's what I wanted to do. I loved studying English. I loved academia, pedagogy, and I really enjoyed doing academic writing. I loved uh, literary criticism and theory, researching different because it intersects with so many different disciplines. And I would always come out of writing a paper with learning about some new philosophy or some new branch of the humanities. But I had a conversation with one of my professors, and she said, if you're going to do a PhD, you got to be willing to do it just because you love it, and not necessarily because you're going to get a job out of it. And I was like, whoa, that kind of sucks. And we had 2 openings when I was there in our English department, and each had like 200 applicants. So like you were saying, I mean, it was just abysmal odds. It was like, I'm going to spend, I would get it paid for because that's how a lot of PhD programs work in America. But I'd spend like 6 years doing a thesis, and I might not even have a job after it, or even a good job. And I remember my girlfriend's mother telling us one time when we were visiting her, this really stayed with me. We were visiting them for Christmas, and she said she was just reading something about some book on, advice on success or something like that, like a CEO or someone, one of those motivational speakers, saying that, the successful people look for openings and look for unfilled talent and things, and take an opportunity to fill those roles. And when I got out of school and saw, all the cryptocurrency bubble and stuff like that, started getting into Bitcoin, I was like, well, I can write, and this needs writers, so I might as well try to do this. And before this, I got a job offer to work at a PR firm in Nashville for music, which I love music, but let me tell you, man, thank God I did not do that because I would not be enjoying my job nearly as much as I do now.
Yeah, and there's not as much potential for the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
And kind of stale. And I know that it's Nashville, Tennessee, which is like the capital of the world for songwriting.
For sure. Yeah, but for PR, it's like not, I don't know, for public relations. I mean, it would just be a really demanding industry, and I would have been able to probably do some cool things. Like I love going to music festivals, so my job would have let me do that. But, with this, I can write about Bitcoin, and then if I want to, I can start, now that I've got some published stuff, I can start freelancing for some journals in Nashville if I want to, maybe try to break into music. Getting paid to write about anything was just such a blessing for me, because it's been like a desire of mine just to be able to make my career as a professional writer or journalist of some regard. And being able to do that right out of college was I was very humbled and blessed to be able to do that.
I know exactly what you're saying.
Right? It feels good, man.
But we
feels good
in Romanian, where it basically translates as you're going to die, you're going to starve as a writer. You're going to die out of starvation because there's not much that you can do. And unless you're one of the 1% who are successful in the field, it's just going to be this kind of artistic way of living, just like being a musician. But I guess it's harder to make it as a musician, like a band member or something,
Yeah,
than it is as a writer, because there's so much more that you can do with words and writing as opposed to just composing and recording music.
for sure. I think definitely with the internet, that's been true too. With like, I mean, that's how, I mean, look at us, you know, like the internet's been great for like industry publications and like opening up all these different types of beats and things like that. And has been bad in terms of monetizing content because it's let in advertising revenue in lieu of like subscriptions. So some content becomes bad and diluted. But it has also let more people monetize their writing abilities. It's become a less gate-kept profession, I think, in a lot of regards.
It is a geek profession, and
Oh, I said a gate-kept, like gatekeeping.
okay.
But yes, I mean, yeah, it is a geek profession, especially especially ours.
Yeah, and gate kept. But it's going to get bigger, right? We all expect for this to grow. And the people who have been around for a longer time, they have known something much more than we do right now. And
Yeah.
they had this kind of blind faith in whatever project that they were working on. And I can think of the two founders, the two co-founders of Bitcoin Magazine. They're Vitalik Buterin, and the other one is actually Romanian, Mihai Anisia.
Mm-hmm.
And he got rich from the Ethereum ICO and now lives in Switzerland.
Yeah, seriously, just like chilling. I mean, fuck, dude, that's what I'd do. If I made millions from something like that, I mean, I might keep going, but I tell you, first thing I'd do is I'd buy me a house in Colorado so I could go skiing, and then I'd buy me a house on the coast of Scotland so I could have a place to go in Europe, and maybe one in France. Switzerland would be good, but that's way too expensive for me.
I don't know if you'll be able to sustain this kind of lifestyle because you're going to pay a lot of taxes.
Yeah, that's true, but I don't know, man. If you made, I mean, because they, depending on how long he held, he could have made out like a bandit. Because the Ethereum founding team, not only did they get, you know, basically the founding team like pre-mine, but they also could accumulate, you know, during the ICO and stuff like that.
They had like 60% pre-mines for the founders, and
wow, was it really 60?
I'm not sure how
Jesus.
the proportions look. It's either 40 to 60 or 60 to 40.
Because the thing is, I know that Anthony from Anthony sold out pretty early, but he still made a lot of money from it. It's not like dude's hurting, you know. Like dude still made millions from it. Yeah, I don't know, man. I think that's really where the buck did stop with me with Ethereum. Is the distribution was not like Bitcoin's at all.
Well, to me, it was all about the broken promises and trying to go at once, but not being able to accomplish anything and get it right. And also decentralization, because you basically have 3 people in a conference call being able to make changes overnight about the plans. And you're going to see how they decide to have delays for some kind of network upgrade. And that's what they call their hard forks. And then you're going to have a delay for the mining difficulty adjustment, just so they can please a handful of people who maybe sponsored their activities. So in this way, it's very centralized and it's nothing like Bitcoin.
Yeah, absolutely. And like for all the promises and stuff like that too. It's just we'll see. I mean, it could. I think there's a very real possibility that it can and will be around in some capacity. Either that or something might totally kill it and replace it. I think though, in terms of like one of the things I think is that like what I always say is Bitcoin has proven that it has a use case. I think, and some would say it's too early for that. But I think the whole decentralized monetary system and store of value, or just digital gold, the whole digital gold meme, like that's a hard use case. It is hard money. Ethereum cannot call itself hard money. So only way Ethereum can justify it being it's being a relevant asset at all is if smart contracts are actually is going to be as good as everyone says they're going to be in that camp, and that people use the Ethereum ecosystem to support some sort of, decentralized financial system. I'm not going to say DeFi because I hate that, but if it can do that, and I think that it could still, I really do believe that Ethereum could prove itself on this front, potentially. I think there's a chance that it could, but I'm not going to say for certain, and I think it's more likely that the kind of smart contracts that they're going to want to deploy, if you want to do it in a decentralized way, they're going to be able to do it on Bitcoin eventually in a way that's just as scalable as Ethereum. Because like you were saying earlier, Ethereum can't support this all on the main chain. It's going to have to support secondary scaling eventually. Or they're going to do it through some sort of shitty, like closed enterprise thing, which isn't going to offer the benefits that Bitcoin offers at all.
I was about to crack a joke about the fact that you defy DeFi.
But I still use decentralized finance. Oh, yeah, DeFi. I do DeFi. Yeah, I do a little bit. I don't know. I don't know if it's the best word. But I assume you're pretty set in stone. I won't say anti-Ethereum, but you're not convinced at all.
Also, coming back to that argument about Marxists, in that article of mine, because I wanted to mention it, I basically distinguished between two major categories, and you have the more anarchist type of leftists who are anti-establishment and believe in that utopian kind of society, and very appealing, the idea that they can have stateless money and any kind of asset that cannot be taken away from them, and maybe that they have wet dreams about some kind of redistribution scheme with it. But other than that, they should be loving Bitcoin. The social democrats, on the other hand, who are closer to the center, and they are what you Americans call liberals.
Yeah.
They are the ones who love the banks. And to me, that's mind-blowing, because they will name out every injustice in this world, and they will try to eliminate any kind of privilege. But it's like they play the game of big banks. They just trust them without any kind of questioning.
Yeah, dude, it's
banks are great.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
To them, banks are great, and in our modern times, banks are actually an extension of the state.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the thing is, like, especially think like in America, especially some actually extreme leftists have more nuanced opinions about banking. But for your average, just like run of the mill milquetoast liberal or Democrat, they're neo-libs, right? Like a neo-libs here being like the economic application of the term, where they're just all about big business, big capital, and they're all about those banks and the system that lets propagate all this stuff that obviously we as Bitcoiners are against. And I don't know why some people, I guess it's because, and this is where people call you a conspirator if you say stuff like this, but I mean, look at what happened to Jeffrey Epstein. Like, conspiracies are becoming, are becoming chic. But at the end of the day, the reason people will support Keynesianism and all the stuff that's related to that is because they were told in school that this is the right thing because we use this system, right? And they're just not being critical. And the establishment, makes sure that this is what people believe in some regards. And they have a vested interest in making it stay, and they kind of make the rules in a lot of regards. So I think that's why it's become so ingrained for people.
I agree, but at the same time, you have to think about the fact that you have a certain percentage of annual inflation in your currency, and in the United States, it's about 2%. And then you have banks which do not give you an equal amount of interest when you deposit. And
right.
You realize that you're basically screwed. If you want to save, there is no way of doing it, and you have to invest your money. And for that, you need some kind of education or good information.
Yes.
About putting your money onto the right kind of assets.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you don't invest you're going to see how your money loses value. And it's not that much in the case of the United States. But in
Right.
the world, it's insane.
Yeah, for sure. Yo, I hate to cut this short, but my girlfriend's about to get home, and I'm cooking shrimp fajitas tonight, so I'm about to have to hop on that cooking game.
Okay. Do you want me to leave this part in which you mention what you're cooking?
No, you can leave it. It's totally fine.
Okay.
As long as you don't care.
I don't care, really. Maybe
Rad.
people will say that they want a portion of their delicious.
Yeah, we'll put it on the blockchain, man. We'll launch a fajita token.
Oh, yeah. But an 80% pre-mine.
Yeah, at minimum.
And 10% founders rewards.
Yeah, and 5% obviously to the operations, right? Because we got to make sure we have enough funding to keep it afloat. Well, hey man, this has been really fun. I've really appreciated it. Once again, really glad to have you on the team. And to all his listeners, if you don't follow him already, you should. Awesome writer and great thoughts on Bitcoin, especially as it relates to things outside of its immediate orbit.
Also, I should mention your Twitter dash. It's As I Lay Huddling.
Yeah, that's a William Faulkner reference, As I Lay Dying, which is some people think it's in relation to the band, but it's not.
So huddling can be like dying in some respect.
Yes, exactly.
Because you're gradually aging, and if you huddle too much, you'll end up holding on to the assets without actually doing anything. But some people are fine with, like Mr. Huddle in Bitcoin. He says that
yeah, for sure.
Plans to just huddle for the rest of his life and pass the Bitcoins to his nephews or something. But anyway, this has been great, and I'm happy that we got to record this. Have fun cooking, Colin. And
thanks, man.
This again sometime.
Yep, absolutely.
So, goodbye.
See you, man.